Alors, resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Madame la Présidente,
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Avant que je commence, je veux juste...
Before starting, I'd like to point out that I'll be sharing my time with the honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Today to talk to an issue, finally, that we're talking about in the House that I think really matters to people from my riding, and if it were to pass, would actually do something for them. We spend a lot of time talking about various issues that the different parties bring forward, and I'm not always convinced that that's really what's top of mind for my constituents. But the idea that people who in half a day, Madam Speaker, are making what an average Canadian worker makes in the entire year, are then getting to send that money to Barbados and not spend tax on it, or to decide around the corporate board table that they're going to get paid in stock options instead of a salary and then not pay the same tax on that money, Madam Speaker, is outrageous. And so there's an important principle at stake here. It's one that separates the NDP from the other two parties, traditional parties in this House, who, have spent a long time, Madam Speaker, working together to find ways to help people who are already rich and already powerful to shelter their money from paying their fair share, Madam Speaker. And so that's something that Canadians want to see action on. It's something that people from where I'm from want to see action on, because they're going out to work every day, Madam Speaker, and they're paying their fair share of taxes. But they're also looking at their families and noticing that as their parents age or their grandparents age, that they need help with health services, that the cost of drugs is high. And we hear successive Liberal and Conservative governments, it doesn't matter which, at the end of the day, or what they promise in their platforms, plead poverty when they get into government and say, we don't have the money for a national pharmacare program. It's too expensive. Where would we ever get the money? Well, when you look at the amount of money that's bleeding out of the Canadian economy every year because people who are making obscene amounts of money don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, it's pretty hard to believe them, Madam Speaker, whether they're Liberal or Conservative. It's hard to believe that we don't really have the money. The problem is that they'd have to actually stand up to their friends in order to get it. But Canadians deserve a government that's willing to stand up to corporate Canada and say, you're here, you're making money in Canada, and you're not making it out of a vacuum. You're making it because Canadians are going to work every day producing that value for you, and we're asking that you pay your fair share so that when Canadian workers have their mother get sick and she needs to go on a certain prescription drug regimen, that they can afford that. And when Canadians are going out to work to produce that value for you at your company, that you chip in your fair share so that they have proper child care, so that their kids have a safe place to be during the day while they're out producing value for these people who can't be bothered to pay their fair share in taxes and instead think that sending it to Barbados is an acceptable way to conduct themselves, Madam Speaker. So this, for me, is frankly one of the main drivers for me to participate in politics, because when I look at the old line parties, be they Liberal or Conservative, and the way they just fold when powerful rich folks come to Ottawa to tell them what to do, I think it's disgusting, and I think Canadians deserve better. Just an example, for instance, Madam Speaker, we thought maybe the Liberal Party was about to kick its old habit of kowtowing to the rich and powerful in Canada in the last election when they agreed to close the stock hole loophole for CEOs. It's in their platform, Madam Speaker. It's in black and white. That was a promise. Nothing changed from before the election to after the election, except they got elected and they knew they had 4 years and they didn't have to keep their promises to Canadians, was their attitude. So the only thing that changed was that they got elected, and then Bay Street lobbyists came down here, and the evidence is there in the lobbying registry, and spoke to their buddy, the Minister of High Finance, and said, Mr. Minister, please, you can't do this. It's going to cost me so much money. I'm going to have to get, the B-class yacht instead of the A-class yacht. So can you go to Canadian families and ask them not to have a national pharmacare plan? Can you go to Canadian workers, the ones, that are working for me, and tell them that they can't get access, reliable access to safe child care because I don't want to be embarrassed when I go down south for a month and my yacht's not the nicest on the dock? Can you, imagine the nerve and the gall of what they're saying in those private conversations, Madam Speaker, and what they're asking ordinary Canadians who need, not just who need help, but who are working and paying their fair share for a system in this country that's going to deliver on the things they need, be it childcare, be it a drug plan, be it investments in home care. No, we got a government, get this, Madam Speaker, we got a government that is unwilling to go after tax cheats. They're giving them amnesty and then saying they don't have enough money for home care, so, the provinces are going to have to accept the Harper escalator on health care, and if they want just the little bit of home care that we eked out for Canadians, some home care money, was an election promise. We said we'd flow it immediately. We managed to find a little bit of that money, but we're not going to give it to you unless you sign on to the Harper escalator. I mean, that's where politics has gone in this country under this government, is that they're using promises that they made and money that should have been there, that they promised would be there, to hold provinces hostage, to reduce less healthcare, to accept less healthcare funding overall that would go and have a direct benefit to Canadian working families, while in the meantime they're instructing the CRA to give amnesty to the people who are taking that money out of the Canadian economy and sending it elsewhere, Madam Speaker. I think it's reprehensible. Then we talk about other current issues, like, for instance, worries about whether we have enough resources to accommodate refugees, whether we're doing our fair share when it comes to First Nations and giving them what they're owed in order to get those communities back up on their feet, Madam Speaker. And again, governments plead poverty, be it Liberal governments or Conservative governments. It ends up being the same. And the fact of the matter is, we produce a lot of wealth in Canada, Madam Speaker. And if the people who are making the most at the top would pay their fair share, we could afford to do these things. So there's a revenue problem in Canada. But it's not because the revenue doesn't exist. It's not because the wealth isn't being produced. It's not because we can't pay for these things. It's because this government won't pay for it, because it means challenging their buddies, Madam Speaker. And that's not fair to ordinary Canadians who are paying their fair share, who are going to work every day, and who want and thought, I think some of them really did think they were voting for a government that was willing to do that. So they'll talk about their tax cut for the middle class. They can't define the middle class, so it's interesting to hear them use the term all the time. In fact, they put in writing that they couldn't define the middle class. But for those, at least we can say that the middle class, according to the Liberals, doesn't include anyone making under $45,000 a year. And then they promised that they'd make up for that tax cut at least by instituting a new tax on those making the most. Well, and that was going to be revenue neutral. Well, they did bring in that tax increase, but they didn't do it on the basis of paying for the tax cut for the middle class, which, people who got the most benefit out of that tax cut already make six figures. So there you have it again. They were going to do the Robin Hood thing. They were going to tax the rich. They're bringing a whole new tax bracket. They were going to pay for this tax cut that was supposed to be for the middle class, actually ended up being for people making six figures, and they couldn't even get that right. So at the end of the day, they actually reduced government revenue to give a tax cut that at the end of the day, the maximum benefit went to people making six figures, and granted amnesty to the people we know are Canada's worst tax cheats in the meantime. Now, how does that square, Madam Speaker, with the notion that they're going to courageously go after Canada's wealthy to give a fair shake to ordinary Canadian workers? Well, for those wondering in the House and those wondering at home, it doesn't square, Madam Speaker. And that's why I'm glad to be sitting in a caucus of 44 people who are willing to say so and put it on the record. Because if it was up to the other two parties, no one would be saying that much, Madam Speaker. And it's important to speak truth to power. It's something that the Liberals promised to do. But when the Bay Street lobbyists came and the decision point came, and you actually had to do the deed, you actually had to say, I'm sorry, rich guys that I really want to be friends with because you're just so cool, and maybe I'll get to ride on your helicopter to a private island, we're going to have to do something that costs you money. And when it came down to it, they couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it, Madam Speaker, because they just want to fit in so bad with the rich and powerful, when they should be trying to fit in with ordinary working Canadians that are going to work every day, are paying their taxes, and want to be part of a country that assesses a fair rate on everyone. It doesn't say, because you make a lot of money, you're going to get off the hook. I mean, what is the message that gets sent to Canadians here, Madam Speaker? If you get caught not paying quite enough tax, but you make a regular income, we're coming after you. The problem is you didn't cheat enough. If you just cheated more, well, then you'd be in the category of people we don't really want to go after. So the message being sent to Canadians here is, Don't cheat a little bit. Cheat a lot. Hope, and you can only do that if you make enough money to cheat that much. And if you do, then we'll want to be your friend. And otherwise, you're just an ordinary Canadian, and we can't give you the time of day after we get elected.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his passionate speech. But I will have a simple question for him. We were elected on a platform to help the middle class, and we committed to raising taxes on the wealthiest 1%. The NDP, time and time again, speaks about helping Canadians. So why, I asked them one simple question. Why would they vote against raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% and reducing taxes for 9 million Canadians got a tax cut because of our government, and that was the first piece of legislation that we passed. So why don't you answer that question? Why do you not vote in favor of raising taxes on the richest Canadians and cutting taxes for the middle class? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to remind the member for Brampton East to address the question to the chair, maybe not use the word you. So the honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll take the opportunity to remind the member that we had proposed an amendment that would have actually changed the tax increase not to apply to the second bracket, and that's the reason why you get people in Canada that are making six figures that see the biggest benefit from that tax cut, but to have a tax cut in keeping with the spirit of the Liberal promise that would have happened at the first income bracket and would have benefited all working Canadians, not just this middle class they can't quite define but seems to be a six-figure middle class, but everyone who's going out and working hard in Canada. And the Liberals voted against that, and I don't understand why, Madam Speaker, and it was in disappointment from the fact that they weren't actually willing to give a tax break to every working Canadian that we felt we couldn't support their proposal.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable parliamentary secretary to the government house leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member said he wants to speak truth to the power. Well, I would suggest to the member we need to speak truth to the New Democratic Party, Madam Speaker, because quite often what they say is questionable in terms of its accuracy. For example, the NDP will say, well, the Liberal government is listening to the Bay Street, the rich from Bay Street, when in fact reality is this Minister of Finance and his parliamentary secretary travelled in every region of the country, consulting with Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And what did Canadians have to say? They want to have a tax break for Canadians, and that's what this government delivered, Madam Speaker. We also provided an increase for the Canada Child Benefit Program. We also provided a 10% increase to the most vulnerable of Canada's seniors through the GIS program. As my colleague pointed out, we also provided an increase in taxes to Canada's wealthiest. Now, what do the NDP have in common on all of those fronts, Madam Speaker, is they voted against each and every one of them. So this Minister of Finance, this government, travels the country, consults in every region of the country. We bring forward a budget that reflects what Canadians want, not what Bay Street wants. And what do the NDP do? They vote against it, Madam Speaker. That is the truth of the NDP.
The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
I don't think I discerned a question in that, Madam Speaker, but I'll give a response nonetheless. I think, I think the member from Winnipeg North and I may have a philosophical difference about what it means to listen, Madam Speaker. So when you go out across the country, if you think listening means smiling and nodding politely in town halls while ordinary Canadians speak, and then going off and doing whatever the heck it was you were going to do anyway, that seems to me to be the member for Winnipeg's North conception of listening. If you mean going out and actually listening to people and then having what ordinary Canadians say inform your policy and sticking to your promises instead of caving as soon as Bay Street lawyers come down and say they don't want to pay more in taxes, oh too bad, we'll just disregard the promise we put in writing, well, then you got a different point of view. That's our point of view, Madam Speaker, is that you should be listening to ordinary Canadians, you should be keeping your promises, you shouldn't fold the first time Bay Street shows up on your doorstep as a newly minted minister.
We have time for a very brief questions. Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Courtenay Albany.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I really want to thank the member for talking about, the trade-offs that we're making, that we're creating this over $100 billion in tax havens for the super rich so they can have nice yachts, as he pointed out, and probably really good chefs too. But I do want to talk about the Liberals talking about the $9 million that got a middle-class tax break. What about the 17.9 million Canadians that didn't get anything? And maybe the member could talk about the decisions that this government could make right now to fix this problem.
Brief answer from the member for Elmwood Transcona, because time has expired.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And the member is exactly right. Look, we might have got some clarity from the government in response to an order paper question where they were asked to define the middle class. They couldn't do it. As far as we were concerned, when we talk about the middle class and people working hard to join it, we're talking about the working class, and that includes people making under $45,000 a year. That's why our proposal to change their tax cut was a good one, and it was shameful that they didn't endorse it.